On the morning the phone call came, Beatrice Sampson watched the rain from the window of her apartment in London. Drops streaked the glass as she held her cup of already cold tea. The unknown number blinked on her mobile screen 3 times before she answered. A deep voice on the other end informed her of the passing of her Aunt Eleanor. Beatrice showed no immediate reaction, as if the news needed time to cross the barrier she had built around herself. "I understand. Thank you for letting me know," she replied with the same methodical coolness she applied to her research at the university. She hung up the phone and returned to watching the rain. At 32, Beatrice was a professor of English literature at University College London, UCL. Her routine was as organized as the bookshelves that lined every wall of her apartment. Monday to Friday she woke at 5:30 a.m., made coffee, revised academic articles, lectured, advised students, all with surgical precision. On weekends, she sought refuge in solitary reading or walks through Hyde Park, always maintaining a safe distance from any possibility of attachment. That phone call meant the inevitable, a return to Gold Valley, a Derbyshire town nestled among mountains, where she had grown up under the silent roof of a house that had never felt like home. 12 years had passed since she had left without looking back, vowing never again to set foot on those cobbled streets that had witnessed her solitary childhood. The next day, driving along the highway that snaked through the valleys and mountains of Derbyshire, Beatrice felt the weight of memories increasing with every mile. The sky, an almost painfully clear blue, contrasted with the darkness of her thoughts. The landscape gradually changed. The concrete of the capital city gave way to the intense green of the ancient woodlands, then to pastures gilded by the winter sun of the valleys. A faded sign announcing "Welcome to Gold Valley," founded in 1823, appeared after a bend. Beatrice slowed down, as if she could postpone the reunion with her past. The town seemed frozen in time, colonial-style houses with their colourful facades, the market square with its wrought-iron bandstand, the parish church with its twin spires pointing to the sky. Everything exactly as in her memories, only a little more faded, like old photographs exposed to the sun. She parked in front of the house that had belonged to Aunt Eleanor, a 2-story yellow building with carved wooden windows and a small, neglected garden. For a moment, she remained in the car, observing the facade as one assesses an opponent before a fight. Finally, she took a deep breath and got out. The key was still hidden under the fern pot on the porch, as it always had been. Some habits survive even when everything changes. As she turned the lock, the familiar creak of the door brought a wave of memories that Beatrice tried to suppress. The smell of old wood, books, and something indefinable, perhaps time itself, filled her senses. "Who's there?" A female voice came from the kitchen, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. Beatrice immediately recognized Mrs. Zilpha, her aunt's longtime housekeeper, and a constant figure during her rare childhood visits. The old woman, now with completely white hair and a face marked by deep wrinkles, stopped when she saw her, bringing her hands to her chest. "Good heavens! Beatrice, child, is it really you?" she exclaimed, her eyes welling up. "It's me, Mrs. Zilpha," she replied, allowing herself a brief, awkward hug. "Your aunt. She always said you'd come back one day," the old woman commented, wiping away tears with the corner of her apron. "I'm just here to sort things out," Beatrice cut in, disengaging herself. "How long will I need to stay?" The almost rude frankness made Mrs. Zilpha take a step back. Her eyes, previously emotional, now showed a mixture of disappointment and understanding. "The probate, the documents, perhaps a few weeks, as Dr. Julian explained," she replied. "I've prepared the guest room for you. Your aunt never let anyone stay in your old room." The information caused a small crack in Beatrice's armor. Why would Eleanor keep untouched the room of a niece who rarely visited, who barely replied to her letters? "I'd prefer to stay in a hotel," she said, ignoring the uncomfortable thought. "During the winter festival?" "Impossible, child. Everything's fully booked. Besides, your aunt left instructions for you to stay here." Beatrice didn't argue. The fatigue of the journey and the weight of the circumstances eroded her resistance. She followed Mrs. Zilpha upstairs, avoiding looking at the photographs that adorned the staircase wall. She knew her image would be there, alongside faces she preferred to forget. The guest room was simple and welcoming, a double bed with a white crocheted bedspread, an old dark wood wardrobe, an armchair by the window overlooking the back garden. On the bedside table, a book of poems by Sylvia Plath, her aunt's favorite author. "I'll prepare some tea while you rest a bit," Mrs. Zilpher offered, leaving her alone. When the door closed, Beatrice sat on the edge of the bed, allowing herself, for the first time since the phone call, to feel the impact of the situation. It wasn't tears that came, but a deep restlessness, as if something inside her knew that this forced return would change everything. After a quick shower, she went down to the kitchen. Mrs. Zilpher's coffee, strong and sweet, brought an unexpected memory: rainy afternoons when Eleanor served her homemade biscuits and told stories about the town. Small moments of connection that Beatrice had buried under layers of detachment. "I need to go to Dr. Julian's office tomorrow," she commented, pushing the memory away. "He already knows you've arrived. He called while you were in the shower," Mrs. Zilpher replied. "He said he'd stop by in the morning." Beatrice nodded, mentally planning her stay. Resolve the probate, perhaps sell the house, return to London as quickly as possible. Simple, objective, without emotional complications. But Gold Valley had other plans for her. The next morning, she woke to the sound of voices coming from downstairs. She dressed quickly in her usual clothes, dark jeans, white shirt, grey blazer, like armor against the informality of the small town. Going downstairs, she found Mrs. Zilpher talking to a tall man with dark hair slightly greying at the temples. "Good morning, Beatrice," the man greeted, turning to her with a restrained smile. "I'm Dr. Julian Mendoza." "Good morning," she replied dryly, extending her hand in a formal handshake. The lawyer seemed to be around 50, with astute eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. There was something familiar about his face that Beatrice couldn't quite place. "Shall we have some coffee before discussing the practical matters?" he suggested, sitting at the kitchen table, with Mrs. Zilpher serving coffee and freshly baked cheese rolls. Dr. Julian spoke about the probate process, but Beatrice noticed that he was studying her carefully. "Your aunt left everything organized," he explained. "As the sole heir, you will receive this house, the small savings she kept, and some other assets. The process is relatively simple, but you will need to remain in town for at least 3 weeks to sign documents and resolve outstanding issues." 3 weeks? Beatrice couldn't hide her annoyance. "I can't stay that long. I have classes, commitments. Unfortunately, our registry office has its own pace," the lawyer replied with an understanding smile. "But perhaps this time in Gold Valley won't be as bad as you think. The town has its charm." After the lawyer left, Beatrice decided to face the task she most dreaded, entering Eleanor's study. The room was at the back of the house, a small space with shelves crammed with books, an old desk, and a leather armchair worn with use. It was there that her aunt spent most of her time, correcting papers for her students from the state high school where she had taught history for 4 decades. As she opened the door, Beatrice was greeted by the smell of old books and the silence that seemed to hold echoes of past conversations. On the desk, perfectly organized, were folders labeled with her impeccable handwriting: documents, bills, correspondence. It was the last folder that caught her attention. Upon opening it, she found dozens of letters organized by date. Some were addressed to friends and acquaintances, others to former students, and then a separate pile tied with a faded red ribbon with her name written on the top. Beatrice hesitated, her heart suddenly racing. They were letters addressed to her, many of them. She recognized some she had indeed received over the years, and to which she had replied with brief formal notes, but most of the envelopes were still sealed. Unsent letters. With trembling fingers, she picked up the one on top, dated just 3 months ago. "Dearest Beatrice, perhaps this letter, like so many others, will remain tucked away in this drawer. Each time I write, I convince myself that I am being intrusive, that you built your life far from here for reasons I respect. Yet I continue to write, perhaps more for myself than for you. I learned from a former student who now teaches at UCL that you published a new article on Virginia Woolf. I bought the academic journal and read it with pride. I always knew you would find your way among words." Beatrice paused her reading when she heard the doorbell. She hastily put the letter back in the folder and went to the door. Upon opening it, she was met with a face she hadn't seen in over a decade, but which she recognized instantly. "B?" the man asked, using the nickname no one else used. "I heard you were back." Before her stood Theo Maxwell, her schoolmate, the one who had once been her only friend in that town before life and her own defenses separated them. "Hello, Theo," she replied, feeling an unexpected wave of contradictory emotions. News travels fast in Gold Valley, apparently. "Some things never change," he smiled, and Beatrice noticed the wrinkles forming at the corners of his eyes. "I came to see how you are." He was carrying a girl of approximately 7 years old in his arms, who observed them with silent curiosity. Her deep brown eyes seemed to evaluate Beatrice with unsettling intensity. "This is Manuela," Theo introduced. "My niece." The girl neither smiled nor waved, merely continued to observe Beatrice with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see beyond appearances. "She's staying with me for a while, as my sister and brother-in-law organize their move to Edinburgh," he explained. They accepted a job offer there. Something in Manuela's quietness touched Beatrice in an unexpected way. She recognized in those observant eyes something familiar, the same silent vigilance she herself had developed as a child. "Would you like to come in?" she offered, surprising herself with the invitation. As Theo spoke about his life as a music teacher at the local school and about the changes in town, Beatrice watched Manuela, who had quietly settled into the living room armchair, leafing through a book of old photographs she had found on the shelf. "She's been speaking little since she learned about the move," Theo commented in a low voice. "Her parents are worried," Beatrice nodded, understanding more than she could explain about the girl's silence. It was a form of control when the world around seemed too unstable. "How long will you be in Gold Valley?" Theo asked, bringing her back to the conversation. 3 weeks, according to the lawyer," she replied, feeling the weight of that period which now seemed endless. "Enough time to rediscover the town," he smiled, "or to run away from it again." The frankness of the comment caught her off guard. Theo had always been like that, direct, straightforward. It was one of the reasons they had grown close in adolescence, before she decided it was safer not to get close to anyone. "I'm not running away," she defended herself. "I just built my life somewhere else." "Of course," he replied with a smile that suggested he didn't entirely believe her. "Listen, we're organizing a small concert in the square on Saturday. My students and some local musicians. Why don't you come? It would be good for you and for Manuela to have company." Before Beatrice could refuse, Manuela looked up from the book and stared at her again with those eyes that seemed to know too much. "Will you go?" she asked, the first words she had directed at Beatrice. And in that simple question, Beatrice felt the weight of a choice greater than it seemed, to continue hiding or to take the first step towards something she couldn't or didn't want to name. "Perhaps," she replied, unable to promise more than that. When Theo and Manuela left, Beatrice returned to Eleanor's study and looked again at the folder of letters. There was something there among those unread pages that both frightened and attracted her, like opening a door to a room she had kept locked for years. As the sun set, coloring the walls of the old house golden, Beatrice made a decision. She took the folder to her room, determined to face her aunt's unspoken words. It was just curiosity, she told herself, nothing more. But a part of her, one she had kept silenced for so long, knew it was the beginning of something much bigger. The first crack in a wall carefully constructed to keep the world and herself out. The next morning, Beatrice woke to the sound of birds she hadn't heard in London for a long time. For a moment she lay motionless, trying to ignore the folder of letters she had left on the desk. During the night, she had read only 2 of them, both recounting mundane events from Eleanor's life, but with an underlying affection that deeply disturbed her. As if her aunt was trying to build a bridge over an abyss that Beatrice had deliberately dug, she got up and opened the window. The back garden, though neglected, displayed a wild beauty. Wildflowers grew among weeds, a cherry tree laden with dark fruits dominated the center, and a small wooden bench rested in its shade. She could imagine Eleanor sitting there, perhaps thinking of her, perhaps writing those unsent letters. Breakfast was served when she went downstairs. Mrs. Zilpha was humming in the kitchen while preparing more cheese rolls. "Good morning, child. Did you sleep well?" "Yes," Beatrice lied, pouring herself coffee. "Dr. Julian called. He said the registry office documents won't be ready until next week," the old woman informed her. "In the meantime, he asked you to sort out the personal belongings you wish to keep." The idea of sifting through Eleanor's belongings, Deciding what to preserve and what to discard caused her unexpected anxiety. She wasn't prepared for that kind of intimacy with her aunt's memory. "I'll see to that later," she replied, standing up. "I'm going for a walk around town." Gold Valley's historic center hadn't changed much. The same cobbled streets, the colorful colonial houses, the market square with its wrought iron bandstand where bands played on Sundays. Beatrice walked aimlessly, observing as a stranger the place where she had grown up. She passed the state high school where she had studied and where Eleanor had taught for decades. The two-story yellow building seemed smaller than in her memories. At the entrance, a bronze plaque gleamed in the sun. "Professor Eleanor Sampson State High School." Beatrice stopped, surprised. She hadn't known the school had been named after her aunt. "Impressive, isn't it?" A male voice startled her. It was Dr. Julian, approaching with a gentle smile. "Your aunt was much loved in this town." "I didn't know," Beatrice murmured, suddenly feeling like an intruder in the life of someone she thought she knew. "There are many things about Eleanor you may not know," the lawyer commented. "She preferred not to burden you with certain information." Something in the man's tone of voice piqued Beatrice's curiosity. "What kind of information?" "It's not my place to reveal," he replied, enigmatic. "But I believe that if you continue reading those letters, you will find the answers." Beatrice stared at him, surprised. "How do you know about the letters?" "I was her confidant. It was I who advised her to write, even without sending them. She said it was a way to maintain the connection, even if invisible." They walked together through the square. Beatrice trying to process this new information, Dr. Julian spoke about the town, pointing out subtle changes she hadn't noticed. The old bakery that was now a craft shop, the new municipal library, the restored mansion that had become a small museum. "Your aunt collaborated a lot with this museum," he commented. "She donated historical family documents, old photographs. Her history intertwines with the history of this town." Before Beatrice could ask more, a familiar figure approached, Theo accompanied by Manuela, who was holding a folder with sheet music. "Hello, B," he greeted. "Dr. Julian." The two men exchanged a look that Beatrice couldn't decipher, a kind of mutual understanding that made her uncomfortable. "We've just come from piano lessons," Theo explained, indicating Manuela's folder. "We're going for lunch at the Valley Hearth. Would you like to join us?" Beatrice hesitated. Her intention was to keep her distance, resolve what was necessary and leave. Lunch with them meant a small deviation from that plan. "Go on, Beatrice," Dr. Julian encouraged. "We need to talk about the probate, but that can wait until tomorrow. Take the opportunity to rediscover the town." Something in Manuela's gaze, that mixture of curiosity and reserve, tipped the balance. "All right," she finally agreed. The Valley Hearth restaurant was in an old house on the main street with dark wooden tables and red checkered tablecloths. The smell of homemade food, hunter's stew, roast pork loin, sautéed kale, awakened unexpected memories of childhood Sundays in Beatrice. "Eleanor loved the chicken with okra here," Theo commented as they settled in. "She came every Sunday after church." "How do you know that?" Beatrice asked, suddenly bothered that Theo seemed to know her aunt's habits better than she did. "In recent years I sometimes accompanied her," he replied naturally. "After I returned from Nottingham, we started meeting regularly. She helped a lot when I was going through difficult times." The waiter approached, interrupting the conversation. Manuela, who had remained silent, ordered orange juice with precision and confidence, surprising Beatrice with the contrast between her previous shyness and this small assertiveness. During lunch, Theo spoke about his life after leaving Gold Valley, music college in Nottingham, the brief marriage that didn't work out, the return to his hometown to care for his ailing father. He spoke with a frankness that Beatrice secretly envied, the ability to expose his vulnerabilities without seeming diminished by them. "And you? What happened after you left here?" he asked. Beatrice provided the edited version she always offered, her degree in literature, master's, doctorate, university position. Facts, dates, achievements, nothing about feelings, failed relationships, or the loneliness that inhabited her apartment in London. "Sounds like a perfect life," Theo commented, with a tone that suggested he knew there was more behind that facade. "It's the life I chose," she replied defensively. "Aunt Eleanor said you were the smartest person she knew," Manuela suddenly interrupted, looking at Beatrice with those penetrating eyes. but also the saddest. The comment coming from a child's mouth hit Beatrice like a punch to the stomach. She felt a blush rising up her neck, her breath momentarily suspended. "Manuela," Theo gently admonished. "I'm sorry, Bea. She sometimes repeats things she hears without understanding the context." "I do understand," the girl protested, with an indignation worthy of her 7 years. "Aunt Eleanor explained to me that some people are like books with padlocks. The story is inside, but no one can read it." Beatrice swallowed hard, unable to respond. The analogy was disturbingly accurate, and the fact that it came from Eleanor through this child made it even more disconcerting. Changing the subject, Theo interjected, noticing the discomfort. "Have you been to your old room?" "Eleanor kept everything exactly as you left it." Beatrice shook her head. "I haven't had the courage yet," she admitted, surprising herself with the honesty. "Perhaps you should. There are things there that might help you better understand Eleanor and yourself." After lunch, they walked together back to the market square. The afternoon sun gilded the cobblestones, and the air had that special quality of countryside towns, clean, scented by flowering trees and slightly hazy with dust. "I need to take Manuela home for her afternoon rest," Theo said when they arrived. "But the invitation to Saturday's concert is still open." "I'll think about it," Beatrice replied, still shaken by the girl's comment. "You should go," Manuela insisted, her small hand briefly holding Beatrice's. Aunt Eleanor liked music. She said it helped open the padlocks. Alone again, Beatrice decided to face what she had been avoiding. She returned to Eleanor's house and went directly upstairs, stopping before the door of her old room. The hand-painted porcelain doorknob, a blue rose, her 15th birthday gift, was still there, intact. She took a deep breath and turned the knob. The room was exactly as she had left it 12 years ago, the single bed with the patchwork quilt made by her grandmother, the bookshelf with books organized by color, a system she had created at 13, the small wooden chest at the foot of the bed where she kept her childhood treasures, the desk under the window from which one could see the garden. She sat on the bed, feeling the mattress yield under her weight. Why had Eleanor kept all that? Why preserve a sanctuary for someone who rarely called, who replied to letters with hasty notes, who rejected invitations with transparent excuses? She opened the desk drawer and found her teenage notebooks, class notes, attempts at poetry, locked diaries. She picked one up, black cover, golden clasp, and forced it open. Her own handwriting, sharp and slanted, filling pages with a rage and sadness she had forgotten she once felt. "Dear Diary, today marks 10 years since Mum left. Dad hasn't mentioned anything as usual. Aunt Eleanor tried to hug me, but I couldn't hug her back. I'm tired of people leaving, tired of missing them, tired of waiting. It's better not to expect anything from anyone." She closed the diary, disturbed. Those words could have been written yesterday. The feeling remained the same, just buried deeper under layers of rationality and control. It was then that she noticed, at the back of the bookshelf, something she didn't remember leaving. A carved wooden box with her name on it. She approached, curious and apprehensive. Inside, she found a collection of small objects. An open book-shaped brooch, cinema tickets, a peacock feather, a blue silk scarf, a small clay sculpture of a female face. Beneath these objects, a sealed letter. Eleanor's handwriting addressed simply, "To Beatrice, when you are ready." Her heart raced. Ready for what? She picked up the letter, but before she could open it, she heard the doorbell. She hastily put it in her pocket and went downstairs. At the door, Dr. Julian carried a folder of documents. "Sorry to interrupt your afternoon, but I thought you'd want to see this soon," he said, handing her the folder. "These are the documents related to Eleanor's property in Littlewood, the neighboring district. The country house that belonged to your grandparents." "Country house?" Beatrice repeated, confused. "What country house?" The lawyer seemed genuinely surprised. "Your aunt never mentioned it. It's a small but charming property, about 15 kilometers from here. Eleanor spent many weekends there, especially in recent years." Another piece of the puzzle that was Eleanor's life, a life Beatrice realized she knew only superficially. "Is there anything else I should know?" she asked, a hint of irritation in her voice. Dr. Julian studied her for a moment, as if assessing how much she could process at once. "Many things, Beatrice, but some of them I believe your aunt preferred to tell in her own way. Keep reading the letters. Visit the country house, and allow yourself to feel instead of just analyzing. The unsolicited advice bothered her, but she couldn't completely ignore it. There was something in the way the lawyer spoke, with knowledge, but without judgment, that reminded her of Eleanor herself. After his departure, Beatrice returned to her room with the folder containing the documents for the Littlewood property. It included house plans, old and recent photographs, property deeds. In one of the photos, she recognized her aunt sitting on the porch, next to a man who seemed familiar. She turned the photograph over and read the note on the back. Eleanor and Julian, Spring 2021. The resemblance she had noticed in the lawyer now made sense. There was something of Eleanor in him. Were they relatives? Longtime friends? Or something more? She turned her attention to the unsent letters. She picked up the next one from the pile, dated 5 years ago. Dearest Beatrice, yesterday I met your old literature professor, the one who encouraged you so much. I told him about your published articles, your doctorate, your university position. His eyes shone with pride, as did mine. She was always exceptional, he said. She just needed to believe in herself. I wonder if you believe in yourself now, Beatrice, if you can already see what I always saw in you, not just the sharp intelligence, but the deep sensitivity you try to hide. The one that made you cry with poems when you thought no one was looking. Beatrice stopped reading, disturbed. How did Eleanor know that? She had never told anyone about the afternoons hidden in the municipal library, reading T.S. Eliot or Sylvia Plath until tears came. She continued reading. Julian says I should respect your space, your silence. Perhaps he's right. Perhaps there are scars that need time to heal, pains that only you can understand. But if you are ever ready to talk about them, know that I will be here. I always have been. The letter ended without the usual formal farewell, just a scribble that seemed to have been made in haste, as if Eleanor had been interrupted, or perhaps too emotional to continue. Beatrice felt something warm trickling down her face and realized with surprise that she was crying. She hadn't cried in so long that the sensation felt strange, almost too physical. She quickly wiped away the tears, as if someone might see her. She picked up the letter she had found in the wooden box, the one addressed to her when she was ready. Her fingers hesitated on the sealed envelope. Was she ready? To face whatever Eleanor wanted to tell her, from beyond the final distance. The sun was beginning to set, painting the room in orange hues. A gentle breeze entered through the window, swaying the lace curtains. Somewhere in the street, children were playing, their laughter reaching her like echoes of a world she didn't belong to, or from which she had voluntarily excluded herself. She put the letter back in her pocket again. Not yet. She needed more time, more courage. At that moment, her mobile vibrated. A message from Theo, confirmed for Saturday. Concert at 4 p.m. Manuela is eager to show what she's learned. Beatrice hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Part of her wanted to refuse, to regain control, to re-establish the distance. It was safer that way. It always had been. But another part, one that seemed to be gaining strength since she arrived in Gold Valley, wanted something different. Something that didn't yet have a name, but that pulsed like a second heart within her. I'll be there, she replied simply. Before she could change her mind, putting her phone aside, she turned to the window. Outside, the town was beginning to light up, small golden points against the blue-violet twilight. Gold Valley lived at its own pace, indifferent to the internal dramas unfolding within its old houses. Inside her, something also lit up. A small, flickering, but persistent light. A light she had extinguished long ago, convinced that darkness was safer. In the garden below, Mrs. Zilpha was beginning to collect laundry from the line. Her movements were slow, methodical, like an ancient dance she knew by heart. The old woman looked up and saw Beatrice at the window. She smiled and waved, a simple gesture of recognition. Beatrice waved back, feeling strangely comforted by this small act of connection. Perhaps it was possible, after all, to let a little light in without everything crumbling. On Saturday, Beatrice woke early, restless. The week had passed in a blur of discoveries and contained emotions. She had continued reading Eleanor's letters, one each night, like someone taking a bitter medicine that, secretly, was beginning to take effect. Each word revealed an aunt different from the image she had built, not the distant, Formal teacher she occasionally visited, but a woman of deep feelings, who observed her niece with attentive eyes and an open heart. She decided to visit the country house in Littlewood that morning. Before the concert, Mrs. Zilpha prepared her a small basket with local baked goods and a thermos of coffee. "The road is beautiful but solitary," the old woman commented. "Your aunt always took a snack when she went there." Beatrice got in the car and followed the GPS directions. The road wound through green hills, with occasional views of valleys where morning mist still hung like a translucent veil. After 40 minutes of driving, she spotted the small property, a simple stone and wood house with a wide porch and a garden that, even without recent care, displayed a wild and inviting beauty. The interior surprised her. Unlike the house in Yitu town, with its formal and traditional decor, this space was bright and artistic, walls in light tones, rustic furniture, shelves filled with books, without the meticulous organization that characterized Eleanor. Paintings by local artists decorated the walls, many depicting Derbyshire landscapes in vibrant colors. In a corner of the room, something unexpected, an old piano. Beatrice approached, intrigued. She had never known her aunt played the piano. On the instrument, sheet music yellowed with time, some with marginal notes in Eleanor's unmistakable handwriting. She sat on the bench and touched a key, then another. The sound, though slightly out of tune, filled the room with an almost palpable melancholy. She didn't know how to play, but vaguely remembered music lessons at school, the few she had attended before convincing her father to let her off, claiming she needed to focus on more important subjects. She opened one of the side drawers of the piano and found a small leather notebook. Leafing through it, she realized it was a musical diary. Eleanor noted thoughts and associated them with compositions. Chopin, Nocturne Op. 9, Number 2. How I wish Beatrice could hear this with me. There are questions that only music knows how to answer. The entry, dated just 2 months ago, made Beatrice feel a pang of regret. How many invitations had she refused? How many opportunities to truly know her aunt had she let slip away, protecting herself behind excuses of work and commitments? She continued exploring the house. In the study, a desk overlooking the garden held more diaries and notebooks. In one of them, she found drafts of a book Eleanor was apparently writing, Memoirs of a Country Teacher. The stories were about her students over decades, about the transformations in Small Gold Valley, about the difficulties and joys of a life dedicated to teaching. On a loose page, a highlighted passage caught her attention. There are students who mark us with their exceptional intelligence, others with their perseverance, still others with their natural kindness. But those who leave the deepest marks are those who carry invisible pains, those who have built walls so high that even they themselves can no longer climb them. My niece Beatrice was my greatest student, even when she wasn't in my classroom. With her, I learned that love is not always enough to heal wounds. Sometimes time is also needed, a lot of time, and patience, and the willingness to wait without guarantees. Beatrice closed the notebook, her throat tight. Why had she never perceived the depth of Eleanor's feelings? Why had she maintained this stubborn distance, even when a part of her yearned for connection? She continued her exploration and discovered, in a small back room, something completely unexpected. An art space with an easel, paints, brushes, and dozens of canvases. Some blank, others in different stages of completion. The paintings revealed a talent Beatrice hadn't known about. Landscapes of Gold Valley, portraits of local residents, still lifes with everyday objects that, under Eleanor's gaze, gained dignity and beauty. On one wall, a series of portraits caught her eye. They were studies of the same face at different ages. A girl with serious, intense eyes, a teenager with a defiant expression, a young woman with a gaze that blended intelligence and sadness. With a shock of recognition, Beatrice realized they were portraits of herself. The last in the series showed her as she was now, short hair, composed expression, eyes that seemed to guard secrets even from herself. Beside it, a note. From memory, as I imagine you are today. Eleanor had painted that portrait without seeing her, based only on memories and perhaps on the rare photographs Beatrice shared on social media. The precision with which she had captured not only her appearance, but something deeper, an essence Beatrice tried to hide even from herself, was disturbing. When she finally left the country house, the sun was already high. During the drive back to Gold Valley, Beatrice felt as if she had visited not just a physical place, but a space within herself that she had locked away long ago. The Eleanor who emerged from those discoveries was a woman of multiple talents, keen sensitivity, and a capacity for unconditional love that Beatrice had never allowed to reach her. Upon arriving in town, she went straight home to prepare for the concert. She chose a simple but elegant dress, navy blue, which she had kept in her suitcase without knowing exactly why. She was pinning up her hair when Mrs. Zilpha knocked on the door. "This arrived for you," she said, handing her a small envelope. Inside, a handwritten card. "I hope you come today. I will play Aunt Eleanor's favorite song, Manuela." The childish handwriting, with its uneven letters and obvious effort to write correctly, touched Beatrice in an unexpected way. The silent, observant girl was trying to communicate, extending an invisible hand that somehow seemed harder to ignore than many others before it. The market square was transformed for the concert. Chairs arranged in a semicircle in front of the bandstand, where musical instruments awaited their performers. People of all ages circulated, chatting animatedly. Beatrice felt out of place. In this atmosphere of communal familiarity, so distant from her life in London. "You came," Theo's voice interrupted her thoughts. He smiled, genuinely happy to see her. "Manuela is nervous, but she'll be excited when she sees you." She accompanied him to one of the front rows, where a seat had been reserved for her. Beside her, an elderly lady with a floral hat smiled warmly. "You must be Beatrice," she said, extending a wrinkled hand. "I'm Clara. I was Eleanor's colleague for 40 years at the high school." Before she could respond, Clara continued. "Your aunt talked about you a lot. She showed off your academic articles as if they were trophies. 'My Beatrice,' she would say, 'has the most brilliant mind I've ever known.'" Beatrice swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. The idea of Eleanor proudly sharing her achievements, referring to her as "my Beatrice," created a knot in her throat. The concert began. Students of various ages performed, some with the hesitation of beginners, others with surprising ease. Theo conducted everything with a mixture of professionalism and kindness, correcting errors with an encouraging smile, celebrating successes with genuine enthusiasm. When it was Manuela's turn, the girl walked onto the bandstand with determined steps, although her face revealed nervousness. She sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and before she began to play, she looked for Beatrice in the audience. Their eyes met for a moment, and the girl gave a small nod of recognition. The first notes of Clair de Lune filled the square. Manuela played with absolute concentration, her small fingers moving over the keys with a delicacy that seemed improbable for her age. Debussy's music, with its luminous melancholy, created a moment of suspension, as if time hesitated, allowing something important to be understood. Beatrice felt tears in her eyes, not just for the beauty of the interpretation, but for a sudden vivid memory. Eleanor, years ago, casually mentioning that she would love to take her to a classical music concert. "Debussy," she had said, "has the power to open doors within us that we didn't even know were closed." Beatrice had refused the invitation, of course. She always refused. Now, through the hands of a child she barely knew, the music her aunt loved finally reached her. Too late to share the moment, too early to fully understand what she was missing. At the end of the performance, Manuela stood up, made a small bow to the applauding audience, and then looked again at Beatrice. She didn't smile, but something in her eyes, a mutual recognition, a silent understanding, conveyed more than words could express. After the concert, Theo invited her for coffee at the Square Bakery and Tea Room, along with Manuela and other music teachers. Beatrice was surprised to accept without hesitation. "You played beautifully," she told Manuela when they had a moment alone. "Where did you learn?" "Aunt Eleanor taught me the first notes," the girl replied, stirring her cup of hot chocolate. "She said music is a language that speaks directly to the heart without needing to pass through the head." Again, Eleanor's wisdom reached Beatrice through the lips of a child. It was as if her aunt had left little messages scattered, waiting for her to be finally ready to hear them. "When are you leaving for Edinburgh?" Beatrice asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "In 3 weeks," Manuela replied, looking at her own hands. "I don't want to go." The simplicity of the confession touched Beatrice deeply. She remembered herself years ago in the opposite situation, desperate to leave Gold Valley, convinced that happiness would be anywhere but there. "You really like it here, don't you?" she asked softly. Manuela nodded, serious. "The people who understand me are here. In Edinburgh, I'll just be the new girl, the foreigner." Beatrice recognized the fear in the girl's voice, the same she had felt upon arriving in London, though she had never admitted it to anyone. The difference was that she had embraced anonymity, the possibility of reinventing herself without the weight of memories. Manuela, on the other hand, feared losing precisely what Beatrice had rejected: connection, belonging roots. "You know," Beatrice began, surprising herself with the urge to comfort the girl, "sometimes new places give us the chance to discover parts of ourselves we didn't know. And the people who truly matter, they find ways to stay in our lives even at a distance." She didn't know if she believed those words, but she wanted to believe, for Manuela and perhaps for herself. The girl studied her with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see beyond words. "Like you and Aunt Eleanor?" The question hit Beatrice like a direct dart. She felt a blush rise up her neck. "No, it's not quite like that. We weren't as close as we should have been." "But she loved you very much," Manuela affirmed with the absolute certainty of children. "She showed me all your photos, your articles. She said you were like a daughter." Beatrice felt the world swaying beneath her feet. Like a daughter. Eleanor had never used those words with her. She had always maintained a respectful distance, as if fearing to cross some invisible boundary Beatrice had established. Because she had established boundaries, right? Barriers, walls, moats, anything to keep people at a safe distance where they couldn't hurt her, abandon her, disappoint her. As her mother had done, as her father, in his oppressive silence, had also done. "Are you crying?" Manuela asked, leaning in to get a better look at Beatrice's face. She hadn't noticed the tears until that moment. She quickly wiped them away, embarrassed. "I'm just tired," she lied. "It's been a difficult week." Manuela didn't seem convinced, but she also didn't insist. Instead, she took something out of her dress pocket, a small star-shaped origami. "Aunt Eleanor taught me how to make it. She said that when we miss someone, we can turn the feeling into something beautiful." She offered the star to Beatrice. "I made it for you." The gesture, so simple and yet so laden with meaning, broke something inside Beatrice, like a dam finally giving way after years of containing turbulent waters. She accepted the origami with trembling hands. "Thank you, Manuela. It's beautiful." When Theo approached, he immediately noticed that something had happened. "Everything all right?" he asked, looking from Manuela to Beatrice. "Yes," Beatrice replied, composing herself. "Your niece is special." "So are you," he replied with a gentle smile. "Eleanor always said so." On the way back to her aunt's house, Beatrice held the small paper star like a talisman. The streets of Gold Valley, now bathed in the golden light of the late afternoon, seemed different, no longer a repository of painful memories, but a living, pulsating place, full of stories that intertwined with her own in ways she had never allowed herself to perceive. Upon arriving, she found Mrs. Zilpher on the porch, rocking gently in a rocking chair. "Was the concert beautiful?" the old woman asked. "Yes," Beatrice replied, sitting beside her. "Theo's niece played Debussy. It was Eleanor's favorite music, wasn't it?" Mrs. Zilpher nodded. "She used to play it on the piano at the country house. She said some emotions could only be expressed through music." They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the sky begin to show the first stars. "Mrs. Zilpher," Beatrice began hesitantly, "what was Eleanor like when she was alone? I mean, who was she really?" The question came out before she could contain it, a genuine curiosity that surprised Beatrice herself. For so many years, she had deliberately remained ignorant of her aunt's inner life, convinced that knowing her better would mean being vulnerable to another loss. The old woman smiled, as if she had been waiting for this question for a long time. "Your aunt was like a book written in 2 languages, she began. To the world, she was the respectable teacher, the intellectual, the guardian of tradition. But to those who knew how to look beyond, she was a woman of intense passions, infinite curiosity, and a capacity for love that few fully understood. Beatrice absorbed the words, imagining this Eleanor she had never truly known. Did she suffer? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. Mrs. Zilpha looked at her for a long time before answering. We all suffer, my dear. Your aunt had her pains, her losses, her interrupted loves, but she chose not to define herself by suffering. She chose instead to transform it into something more, into art, into knowledge, into connections with people like Manuela, like Theo. And like Dr. Julian? Beatrice asked, remembering the photograph she had found among the country house documents. Mrs. Zilpha smiled enigmatically. The doctor was very important to your aunt, especially in recent years. They shared a history, but it's not my place to tell that part. I believe you will find the answers. Beatrice thought of the still-sealed letter she had found in her room, the one addressed to her when she was ready. Perhaps it was time. She went up to her room, feeling each step as a stride towards something inevitable. The letter was where she had left it, tucked in the desk drawer. She sat on the bed, carefully tore open the envelope and began to read. My dearest Beatrice, if you are reading this letter, it means I have passed away and you have finally returned to Gold Valley. There is so much I wish I had told you, so many conversations we never had, so many silences we didn't know how to fill. You must be discovering parts of my life that I kept hidden, not out of secrecy, but out of respect for your desire for distance. I always hoped that one day you would be ready to know not just the formal aunt you occasionally visited, but the imperfect, contradictory, and passionate woman I was beyond appearances. There is one revelation, however, that I can no longer postpone. Something that may hurt you initially, but which I hope in time can bring you peace. Julian is not just my friend or confidant. He is your uncle, your father's half-brother and my life partner for the last 15 years. More than that, he is the man your father prevented from having contact with you when you were a child, after your mother's departure. Your father, in his pain and bitterness, pushed Julian out of our lives, convinced that he had interfered in his marriage. The truth, as always, is more complex and less accusatory than it seems. The full story is in the diaries I kept at the country house. Read them when you feel the time is right, or never read them if you prefer. The past can be too heavy a burden, and you have already carried enough weight. What matters, my dear Beatrice, is that you know you were never alone, even when you chose solitude. We were imperfect in the love we offered you, perhaps, but it always existed, constant, patient, waiting for the day you could accept it. Be gentle with yourself, Beatrice. Allow yourself to feel, to make mistakes, to connect. The pain of losing is real, but the emptiness of never having had is infinitely greater. With all the love I always had for you, your aunt, and more than that, Eleanor. Beatrice let the letter fall onto her lap, stunned. Julian, the lawyer she had met a few days ago, was her uncle. And not just that. He was someone her father had deliberately kept out of her life, another potential connection she had been denied. The revelation explained so much: Julian's look of recognition when they met, the familiarity she had felt, the intimate knowledge he seemed to have of her relationship with Eleanor. And it also explained Manuela's comment about Eleanor considering her like a daughter. It wasn't just an expression of affection, it was an acknowledgement of a bond that went beyond the aunt-niece relationship, a bond strengthened by Julian's presence in her life. Sitting on the bed in her old room, with Eleanor's letter in her lap and Manuela's small origami star in her hand, Beatrice felt the world reconfigure around her. Her childhood memories, the absences that defined her, the choices she had made, everything seemed different in light of this new information. And, for the first time in many years, she allowed herself something she had carefully avoided: to feel fully, without filters, without control, without fear of the consequences. She cried, not silent, contained tears, but deep sobs that seemed to come from a place long sealed within her. She cried for the girl she had been, for the woman she had become, for Eleanor, for her father, for her mother, for all the lost connections, for all the rejected love. And through the tears, she glimpsed the possibility of something she had never truly considered: a new beginning. The next morning, Beatrice woke with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. The revelations in Eleanor's letter had circulated in her mind all night, transforming her understanding not only of the past, but of who she herself was or could be. After coffee, she called Julian and asked to meet him. They chose the Square Coffee House, a neutral and public place, as if both needed that protection for the conversation to come. He was already waiting when she arrived, sitting at a back table away from the bustle. Seeing her approach, he stood up, an automatic gesture of courtesy that Beatrice now perceived as part of a family upbringing similar to her own. "Thank you for coming," she said, surprising herself by taking the initiative. "I think we have a lot to talk about." "Eleanor always said this day would come," he replied with a restrained smile, though we both doubted it sometimes. Over the next hour, Julian revealed the story Eleanor had mentioned in the letter. He told her how he had met her aunt at university decades ago, when they were both students in Nottingham. A romance had blossomed, but life circumstances separated them. He pursuing a legal career in London, she returning to Gold Valley to care for her ailing parents. "We reconnected years later when I came to visit your father," he explained. "Eleanor was already a teacher here. I was already established as a lawyer. The connection was still there, but we had both built separate lives." Beatrice listened, absorbing every word, every nuance in the voice of this man who was, biologically part of her family, though essentially a stranger. "What happened next?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Your father and mother were going through difficulties in their marriage. He invited me to stay for a few days, perhaps seeking a mediator or just support. Your mother and I—" Julian hesitated, carefully choosing his words. "We talked a lot during those days. I was an outsider, someone she could be honest with without judgment. There was never anything improper between us, but your father interpreted our closeness as betrayal." Beatrice felt a knot in her throat. "And my mother left soon after. Yes, not because of me, as your father believed, but because the marriage was already irreparably broken. The temporal coincidence was unfortunate. Your father banished me from his life, and by extension from yours. He forbade Eleanor from mentioning me in your presence. And you too?" Beatrice asked, mentally completing the story. "We reconnected years later when I returned to Gold Valley to handle legal matters. The connection was still there, stronger than ever. We decided not to waste any more time. The last 15 years have been the happiest of my life. Ours, actually." Beatrice absorbed the story, realizing how it altered her entire understanding of the past. Her father, whom she had always portrayed as a victim of maternal abandonment, had actively contributed to her isolation, depriving her of family connections because of his own erroneous interpretations and resentments. "Did you try to contact me?" she asked, a part of her fearing the answer, whatever it might be. Julian nodded, his eyes moist. "Many times. I sent gifts on your birthdays which your father returned. I tried to visit you at school, but he had given specific instructions for me to be turned away. When you turned 18, I wrote directly to you at university, but I never received a reply." Beatrice frowned, confused. "I never received any letter." "We suspected as much. Your father probably intervened. Afterwards, we respected your apparent decision to keep your distance. Eleanor said you needed time, that one day you would understand and perhaps seek us out. She never lost hope." A heavy silence settled between them, filled with losses and wasted possibilities. "Why are you telling me all this now?" Beatrice finally asked, though she already knew the answer. "Because Eleanor believed you were ready to hear. Because some truths, even painful ones, are better than assumptions. And because—" Julian took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "Because there is still time, Beatrice. Not to recover the lost years, but to build something new from here." She nodded, unable to express in words the storm of emotions she felt. Part of her wanted to reject it all. The revelation, the possibility of a belated connection, the need to reconfigure her entire understanding of the past. It would be easier to return to London, to the controlled and predictable life she had built. But another part, the one that had been awakening since she arrived in Gold Valley, recognized the opportunity presenting itself. The chance to fill gaps, to answer questions she didn't even know she had, to allow herself a form of belonging she had always denied needing. "I need time," she finally said, "to process all this." "Of course," Julian replied, with a smile strangely reminiscent of Eleanor's. "Time is something I've learned to respect." Leaving the coffee house, Beatrice walked aimlessly through the cobbled streets of Gold Valley. The town seemed different now, no longer a repository of painful memories, but a living, complex place, full of stories that intertwined with her own in ways she had never imagined. Unbeknownst to her, her steps led her to the square where the concert had taken place the day before. On the bandstand, to her surprise, she found Theo adjusting a guitar while Manuela played nearby. "Bay!" he exclaimed upon seeing her. "What a coincidence. We're doing a small extra rehearsal for the school recital next week." Beatrice approached, noticing how Manuela immediately ran to her side, those observant eyes studying her with intensity. "You look different today," the girl commented, with the disconcerting frankness of children. "Different how?" Beatrice asked, genuinely curious. Manuela tilted her head, thoughtful. "Like you woke up from a very long dream." The analogy, so precise in its simplicity, made Beatrice smile. Perhaps you're right. For the next hour she sat on the bandstand steps, watching Theo and Manuela rehearse. The ease of interaction between uncle and niece, the way he corrected her gently, how she absorbed instructions with seriousness, all this awakened in Beatrice a longing she barely recognized. "Can I show you something?" Manuela asked during a break, approaching Beatrice with a folder. Inside were drawings, dozens of them, some colored, others just pencil sketches. Many depicted Gold Valley, the parish church, the square old mansions. Others showed people, her parents, Theo, school friends, and to Beatrice's surprise, several studies of Eleanor. "You draw very well," she praised sincerely. "Especially for someone so young." "Aunt Eleanor taught me," Manuela replied, leafing through until she found a specific drawing. "This is my favorite." It was a portrait of Eleanor sitting at the piano in the country house, seen in profile. The expression captured in the drawing, concentrated, serene, and at the same time passionate, revealed an intimacy that could only come from many hours of observation. "Were you too close?" Beatrice asked, feeling a pang of something that might be jealousy or perhaps just regret. Manuela nodded. She understood me. She said we were similar, souls who observe the world with eyes that see too much. The description was disturbingly familiar. Eleanor had said something similar about Beatrice in one of the unsent letters she had read in recent days. "You miss her?" Beatrice commented, not as a question but as recognition. "Yes," Manuela replied simply. "But she told me not to be sad when she left, because she would leave many parts of herself scattered throughout the world, in the people she loved, in the music she played, in the books she wrote." Beatrice felt a tightening in her chest. She realized with painful clarity that this child, who had known Eleanor for only a few years, had understood her aunt in a way that she herself, after a lifetime, had never allowed herself. "You know, Manuela," Beatrice said after a moment, "I think Eleanor was right. You two are similar. And I think I'm similar to you too, in a way." The girl smiled, the first genuine smile Beatrice had seen her offer. "I know Aunt Eleanor knew too." Theo approached, observing the interaction with a discreet smile. "We need to go, Manuela. Your mum is waiting for us for lunch." Before leaving, Manuela hesitated, seeming to make a decision. She tore a blank page from her sketchpad and handed it to Beatrice, along with a pencil. "For when you miss someone," she simply said, "drawing helps." The gesture, so simple and yet so laden with meaning, made Beatrice feel that knot in her throat again that was becoming familiar. "Thank you, Manuela. I'll try." When she was alone, she looked at the blank page. She hadn't drawn since adolescence, when she had abandoned the art classes Eleanor had insisted she attend. At the time, she had considered it a waste of time. Another activity that would distract her from serious studies, from the safe and controlled path she had charted for herself. But now, sitting on the bandstand steps where so many memories of Gold Valley converged, she felt the urge to try. With hesitant strokes at first, then more confident, she began to draw the square from her angle, the colonial houses, the ancient trees, the Derbyshire sky with its peculiar clouds. It wasn't a technically good drawing. The proportions were slightly off, the lines imprecise. But there was something in it that captured not just the scene, but the feeling of that moment, a woman rediscovering herself in the main square of a town she had abandoned, but which had never truly left her. In the following days, Beatrice delved deeper into the discoveries about Eleanor and about herself. She visited the country house again, this time taking the diaries she had found to read under the shade of the garden trees. In the pages written over decades, she found a woman who had lived intensely, loving, suffering, creating, transforming herself. She also discovered more about the relationship between Eleanor and Julian, a love that had blossomed late, but with rare intensity. Among the notes, she found references to herself, always with affection, always with the patient hope of a true reunion. Beatrice turned 30 today, read an entry from 2 years ago. I sent flowers to her university department without a card. Julian says it's emotional manipulation, but I prefer to think it's just a silent reminder that there is someone in the world who celebrates your existence. Even at a distance, the flowers, Beatrice remembered them. They arrived at her office unidentified, and she had assumed it was a mistake or worse, some unwanted admirer. She had thrown them away without a second thought. The more she read, the more she realized that Eleanor had been a constant presence in her life, even when invisible. She found newspaper clippings mentioning her academic publications, invitations to lectures she had given, even a cropped photo from a conference where she appeared in the background. Concentrated on her notes. On a particularly significant afternoon, Beatrice finally gathered the courage to visit Eleanor's grave in the small cemetery on the outskirts of town. She brought flowers, not the formal roses she would have chosen out of convention, but sunflowers, which she had discovered were her aunt's favorites. Standing before the simple headstone, Eleanor Sampson, 1946-2023, teacher, artist, lover of life, Beatrice felt a whirlwind of emotions, regret for lost time, gratitude for the persistence of Eleanor's love, sadness for the opportunity for reconciliation that would never come. I don't know if you can hear me, she said softly, feeling simultaneously foolish and relieved to express her thoughts aloud. But I think I'm finally understanding what you tried to teach me all these years. About connection, about allowing oneself to feel, about transforming pain into something more. She took the small origami star Manuela had given her from her pocket and carefully placed it next to the flowers. Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I gave up on us both. In the last week of her stay in Gold Valley, Beatrice made decisions that would have been unthinkable when she arrived. She invited Julian to dinner, creating space for the hesitant beginning of a relationship that both knew would take time to fully blossom. She accepted Theo's invitation for a walk in the hills, where they talked about music, art, and the choices that had shaped their lives in such different directions. And most significantly, she spent time with Manuela almost every day, helping her with her English studies, learning the rudiments of piano, sharing drawings and stories. The connection between them, initially based only on the similarity Eleanor had pointed out, deepened into something unique and precious. On a sunny afternoon, sitting in Eleanor's garden, Beatrice finally broached the subject they had both avoided. "You're leaving for Edinburgh in a few days," she commented, trying to keep her voice neutral. Manuela nodded, her eyes fixed on the notebook where she was drawing. "On Sunday. How are you feeling?" The girl shrugged, a gesture that tried to seem casual but couldn't hide her apprehension. "Normal. You know," Beatrice began carefully, "when I first left Gold Valley, I was convinced I would never return, that it would be easier to cut all ties to start a completely new life." Manuela looked up, interested. "And was it easier?" "I thought so for a long time. I built walls around myself, convinced I was protecting myself. But now I realize I was just limiting myself. Do you regret it?" Manuela asked with that intensity that seemed to see through words. Beatrice thought carefully before answering. "Regret is complicated. My choices brought me here to this moment, and this moment has its value." Manuela reflected on this, her small fingers tracing patterns on the paper. "I'm afraid I'll forget," she finally confessed. "Forget Gold Valley, Uncle Theo, Aunt Eleanor, you—" The simple honesty of the confession touched Beatrice deeply. "You won't forget," she assured. "Some connections are too strong to be lost, even at a distance. How do we know which ones they are?" Beatrice smiled, recognizing the question as one she herself would have asked, one she had asked in silence so many times over the years. "I think they're the ones we keep nurturing, even when it's difficult. The ones that challenge us to be more than we thought we could be." She took a small package from her pocket and handed it to Manuela. "I have something for you." Inside there was a hardcover notebook, not new but carefully preserved. "It was mine when I was your age. Eleanor gave it to me on my 10th birthday. I never got around to filling it completely." Manuela opened the notebook, leafing through the first pages where Beatrice had written poems and short stories interspersed with hesitant drawings. The rest was blank, unexplored possibilities, untold stories. "I thought you could continue," Beatrice explained. "Write your adventures in Edinburgh, draw the new places, and when you come back to visit Gold Valley, you can show me." "Will you still be here?" Manuela asked, hope evident in her voice. "I don't live here anymore, remember? But I promise to visit when you come. And we can communicate in the meantime by email, by letters." "Real letters?" "Through the post?" "Yes, real letters," Beatrice smiled, thinking of Eleanor's unsent letters. Sometimes putting thoughts on paper has a magic that electronic messages can't capture. On Sunday morning, the entire town seemed to have turned out at the bus station to say goodbye to Manuela and her parents. Beatrice watched from a distance, feeling a mixture of emotions she no longer tried to suppress or categorize. The girl hugged friends, teachers, neighbors, each farewell laden with genuine emotion. When she finally approached Beatrice, there was a moment of hesitation, as if neither knew exactly how to navigate this new emotional territory. It was Manuela who took the initiative, hugging Beatrice with surprising strength for someone so small. "I'll miss you," she murmured against the fabric of Beatrice's blouse. "Me too," she replied, surprised by the simple truth of those words. "But remember our promise. Letters, drawings, stories. And will you reply, really?" Beatrice felt the weight of the question, not just the practical commitment of maintaining correspondence, but the deeper emotional commitment it represented. "Really," she promised, and she knew she would keep it. When the bus finally departed, carrying Manuela to her new life, Beatrice remained on the platform for some time, watching the road dust slowly settle. Beside her, Theo and Julian waited in respectful silence. "She'll be fine," Theo finally commented. "Manuela is stronger than she seems." "Yes," Beatrice agreed. "I think we all are in a way." The next morning it was Beatrice's turn to leave. Her car was loaded, Eleanor's house tidy, the probate documents finalized. In theory, there was nothing to stop her from resuming her life in London, exactly where she had left off. But she knew that would be impossible. The Beatrice who had arrived in Gold Valley 3 weeks ago, contained, distant, determined to maintain control at all costs, no longer existed. Or perhaps she had never truly existed, just a carefully constructed version to protect something more vulnerable and authentic. On the porch, she said goodbye to Mrs. Zilpha with a genuine hug. "I'll be back," she promised. "To check on the house, to visit." "I know you will," the old woman smiled. Eleanor always knew too. Julian was waiting for her on the pavement beside the car. They had talked at length the previous night, laying the groundwork for what both hoped would become a significant relationship over time. "Call when you get to London," he asked, "so we know you arrived safely." "I will call," Beatrice promised. "And I'll be back soon. I need to decide what to do with the house, with Eleanor's belongings." "There's no rush," Julian assured. "Some decisions need time to mature." Theo arrived just as she was about to leave. He carried a small package wrapped in brown paper. "A farewell gift," he explained, "or perhaps a new beginning." Inside, Beatrice found a handcrafted CD, on the cover handwritten, "For Beatrice, songs Eleanor loved." "I recorded it in my home studio," Theo explained. "I thought you might want to listen to it on the way back, or when you feel nostalgic." The gesture, so simple and yet so laden with meaning, deeply moved Beatrice. "Thank you, Theo, for this and for everything." "See you soon, Bea," he replied, emphasizing "see you soon" instead of goodbye. The return journey to London was different from the outbound one. This time, Beatrice wasn't trying to leave Gold Valley behind, erasing every mile from her memories. On the contrary, she felt she was taking the town with her, not as a burden, but as an essential part of who she was. On the passenger seat rested Eleanor's diaries, the unsent letters, the small origami star, Theo's CD, treasures that 3 weeks ago would have seemed useless sentimentalisms, but which she now recognized as anchors for a new way of being. As the Derbyshire mountains gave way to the London plateau, Beatrice realized she was not just leaving a place, but also a state of mind. The return to London did not mean resuming old patterns, but rather bringing a new perspective to her urban life. Her apartment seemed strangely sterile when she finally arrived, too organized, too impersonal. The perfectly arranged bookshelves, the absence of personal objects, the predominance of neutral tones. A space designed for efficiency and control, not for expression or connection. The next day, upon returning to the university, Beatrice found accumulated messages and emails, academic commitments awaiting, the routine ready to reabsorb her. It would be easy to dive back into work, to use intellectuality as a shield against the emotional vulnerability she had experienced in Gold Valley. But something had fundamentally changed. For the first time in her adult life, Beatrice did not want to hide behind papers, research, and theories. She wanted to find a balance between mind and heart, between work and connections, between the past that had shaped her and the future that now seemed open to unimagined possibilities. That evening, sitting in her living room, she opened Eleanor's last diary, found in the country house. One particular entry caught her. Attention. People talk about second chances as if they are rare, exceptional. But the truth is that life constantly offers us new opportunities. With every sunrise, every encounter, every farewell, the trick is not to wait for the great twist of fate, but to recognize the small openings that arise daily, the cracks through which light can enter. Beatrice closed the diary, feeling the weight and wisdom of those words. She got up and opened her apartment window, something she rarely did, preferring the controlled environment of air conditioning. The fresh evening air of London entered, bringing with it the sounds of the city. Distant car horns, pedestrian conversations, music leaking from a neighboring apartment. On the table, she arranged the objects brought from Gold Valley: Manuela's origami, Eleanor's letters, Theo's CD, a small stone from the country house garden. They were not just memories, she realized, but promises, commitments to a way of living she had only just begun to explore. She picked up her phone and, before she could change her mind, wrote a message to Julian. Arrived safely. Thank you for everything. I'd like to talk more about my father when you're ready. Then she opened her laptop and began to write an email to Manuela, the first of many to come, she knew. She wrote about the journey, about her apartment in London, about how she already missed Mrs. Zilfer's cheese rolls. She promised to send a real letter next week and asked Manuela to tell her about her first days in Edinburgh. When she finished, it was almost midnight. She put Theo's CD into the stereo she rarely used. The first notes of Claire de Lune filled the apartment, the same piece Manuela had played at the concert, which Eleanor loved, which would now serve as a bridge between past and present, between Gold Valley and London, between the Beatrice she had been and the one she was becoming. Sitting by the open window, watching the city lights, Beatrice felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood, the sensation of limitless possibility, of a future not defined by old fears but by new choices. It wouldn't be easy, she knew that. Old habits have deep roots, and the tendency to erect walls against vulnerability wouldn't disappear overnight. There would be days of retreat, moments of doubt, the constant temptation to return to the rigid control that had made her feel safe for so long. But now there was something different: awareness, and with it, the possibility of choice. In the garden of memory she was beginning to cultivate, Beatrice saw Eleanor sitting at the piano in the country house, Manuela drawing intently in the golden afternoon light, Julian sharing stories that filled gaps in her identity, Theo offering friendship without asking for anything in return, Mrs. Zilfer with her simple and profound wisdom. And she saw herself, no longer isolated in a fortress of her own making, but part of a web of connections that stretched across time and space. A fragile web, certainly, subject to breaks and constant repairs, but real, and, for that very reason, infinitely precious. As the sun began to rise over London, Beatrice finally fell asleep, not with the restless sleep of someone who fears what dreams might reveal, but with the tranquility of someone who is finally beginning to make peace with her own heart. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Beatrice's journey has touched your heart. This story of reconnection, forgiveness, and the courage to open up to new possibilities reminds us that it's never too late to start anew. For more inspiring stories like this, we've prepared a special playlist that you can find by clicking the link to your left. If this narrative stirred something in you, please subscribe to our channel and like this video. Daily, we bring new stories that explore the complexities of the human soul. And have you experienced a transformative reunion like Beatrice's? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might inspire other hearts to open up to new possibilities.